Hello students, and welcome to the next lesson in our AS level economics course. Today we're going to be looking at inflation. What is inflation? Inflation is quite simply an increase in the price level over time. So inflation is shown on our y-axis of our AD and AS graphs, which we've looked at earlier on in the course. As we can see, price level is pretty much synonymous to inflation, and if we have an increase in AD, the likelihood is we are going to see a decrease in the level of inflation if we have a movement along the curve, which we can see from a shift from point A to point B. However, if our AD curve actually shifts to the right or to the left, outward or inward, we are going to have an increase in the price level if we have an outward shift, or we're going to have a decrease in the price level if we experience an inward shift. How do we measure inflation? Inflation is mainly measured by using the Consumer Price Index, or otherwise known as the CPI. The CPI is an index of retail price changes of 650 goods and services bought by households in an economy. So, for example, it's basically a basket full of goods and services which you are going to be analyzing for their changes in prices, which you can then kind of figure out which is inflation. So in this basket we have electronics, we have drinks, we have toys, and we have games. And all of these are going to perhaps experience changes in their price over time. So if the price of a football increases by 10% over time, and all of these other products are also experiencing rises in their average costs, inflation is going to increase, and therefore we're going to say that the price of money is deteriorating since we're getting inflation, because all of these products are technically worth the same because the products themselves, their characteristics aren't changing, but their prices are. So this means we're getting an inflation. The changes to all of these prices in the goods pretty much indicate the level of inflation as we've just explained, and you can measure inflation always using the CPI. Another way we can measure inflation is using the RPI, which is the Retail Price Index, and this is also pretty much just like the CPI. It's the CPI plus the cost of mortgages, which then result into how we are going to adjust the prices of all of our goods and services. Now we're going to be looking at types of inflation. Inflation is a sustained price level change, and deflation, however, is the opposite, and this is a negative value of inflation. Disinflation is a decrease in the rate of inflation, and we're going to have a look at how all of these work on a graph. Inflation as a graph. What you can see now is the trend rate of inflation over time. Now what we can see is each kind of definition of types of inflation onto this graph. Inflation being an increased rise in the price level, we can see as the uppermost box because we are seeing an increase in the price level over time. Deflation, which is a negative value, is shown by the box on the lowest end of our graph. As we can see, the value is approaching -1 as our price level, so this is an example of deflation. Disinflation, being a decrease in the rate of inflation, is shown as our rate of inflation decreases from a peak at what was approximately 3.5, and is now decreasing to around 2 or 1 in our next box. Now there are different types of inflation, the first of which is demand pull inflation. Now this happens when we are going to experience inflation because the price level is causing AD to actually shift. So as AD increases, firms are going to have more of an incentive to raise the prices since they can actually assume that increasing spending is going to take place and therefore they get more revenue. So this is shown by the shift from point A to point B. As you can see, as we move from AD to AD1, we are experiencing an increase in the price level and therefore an increase in inflation. Cost push inflation is another form of inflation, and this is a cause of inflation where an increase in the cost of production are going to cause a decrease in productivity and prices to rise. As it's more expensive to produce goods, less goods are actually going to be made, and as a result, the price is going to rise since we have a shortage. This is shown by the graph here. As we shift from point A to point B, our SRAS is going to shift because a determinant of SRAS is the cost of production, and this is what originates in the cost push inflation. We can clearly see that we're going to have a change in the price level from point P to point P1. Now we're going to analyse the advantages and the disadvantages of inflation. The advantages are that as the price rises, people are going to feel wealthier, for example, based on their house prices. If their house prices are going to begin to rise because of inflation, people are going to feel much better about themselves. They're going to feel more confident with the amount of money they have, which is going to lead to a lot more spending in the economy, which will increase AD, and it also will give them better standards of living. Also, inflation is going to increase the asset prices of firms, which may look good externally because other countries and economies will see that perhaps our asset prices may increase, and that may want them to invest in foreign direct investment. However, this is only an exception, and it pretty much never happens because a big disadvantage of inflation is that it disencourages the investment from foreign countries. Because if you invest in an economy that's experiencing inflation, the likelihood is the value of that investment is going to decrease in price as we experience more investment, because the price of the value of the money is lowering. Also, a disadvantage is that people on fixed incomes are really harmed by these rising prices. For example, the pensioners who are only living on a pension as their source of income are going to be damaged by the fact that all of the prices around them are going to be rising, and with the amount of money they have, they're not going to be able to afford and pay for all their products. Also, people tend to spend less as they expect prices to rise even more due to inflation, which is then going to decrease aggregate demand, which is a big problem because that means GDP will also decrease. Here are some questions on inflation. Have a go at answering these on another sheet of paper by pausing the video, and then hit play whenever you're ready to see the answers. Here are the answers. If you did get all of these right, congratulations. I'd advise you to move on to the next video, which will be on the balance of payments and the current and financial account. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.